Slides, you're good to go. Okay, sorry.
All right, well, this is going to be a little different and designed to be more interactive and stuff like that, because there's no right way and wrong way. What I'm going to share with you are sort of the best practices that we've learned here over the last couple years with the new maturity things that are in the product and stuff like that. So a little while ago, I talked about the different groups and how they work together, just as a refresher, because it's important for the scope and stuff. You've got the business units that have information about how we collaborate. They sort of know what we've got to do and inform some of the constraints and stuff. Of course, security, knowing sort of what are the things we have. They have the inventory of things, but they also have all of the restrictions and controls. And last, but certainly not least, we've got legal and the OGCs determining, sort of what's the risk profile and stuff like that. So look, again, the records managers knowing everything in the middle is where this is all key. The same is true, though, when you're starting to talk about these information protection tags. And I thought Mike had a really good point about CUI. So is everyone familiar with CUI? So, okay, so basically the whole idea is we have to tag information and do things with it and stuff like that. It is absolutely a key requirement, but it's also, ironically, it's just good data hygiene. So it's stuff we should have been doing for years and stuff that we just weren't doing and stuff. So what you want to do is make sure that you understand where to focus. Now, what I'll say is that of sort of the three things that you can do, probably data mapping is the one that we probably delay. And it seems counterintuitive, but particularly if you have like a G5 license or something like that, there's so many things that you can save money on in your current operations today with security and compliance that it tends to be the higher priority. You don't want to ignore the mapping and stuff like that, because there are a number of reasons why we need to do it. But just because everyone is so focused on cost savings, look, nobody got 10% increases in their budget this year and stuff like that. So we're all being asked to do more with less. So, these things end up being kind of big drivers as we move forward. So let's talk about some of the potential cost savings. When it comes to data mapping, most agencies don't have tools. Most, organizations don't have, $1 million data mapping systems or, big ID or, other tools to go out and do that stuff. So you're not going to be able to save money from the budget. Most of the time, that's going to be an incremental expense. And again, we talked about this earlier. The good news with Microsoft is it's really, really inexpensive to get started with the data mapping and stuff like that. It's sort of the razor blade strategy. They want you to get sucked into it, to use it more and more. And then when there's a business benefit, you'll pay more for it and stuff. But to build your initial stuff, it is one of the cheapest things that I've ever seen and stuff. So on the security side, being able to get rid of, other tools, the semantics, the McAfees of the world, those are real cost savings. Agencies will spend millions of dollars a year on these things. That's money that, your G5 license, offsets and stuff, because it covers all of those things. The things that you'd have for, a proof point or something like that for doing the email security and other things, again, tools that you can get rid of, sunset and take out of the budget and stuff like that. On the compliance side, the numbers can be fairly dramatic as well. You've got email archives, things like Enterprise Vault, Proofpoint, Global Relay, particularly Source One. A lot of federal agencies had email extender and stuff that turned into Source One. That product is not only past end of life, actually in December, they withdraw support. So they're already past the point for doing security updates and operating system updates. In December, they won't even answer the phone anymore and stuff like that. And there's still a ton of agencies that have, terabytes and petabytes of information stranded in these platforms. And it's, you're still paying, really expensive fees to store all that stuff. The e-discovery tools, the Relativities, Xteros, Everlaws of the world and stuff like that, those are expensive tools. Now, those tools are a little different in that most of the time, those are priced based on how much data that you're storing for the matters and stuff. So they'll charge you, $100,000 per year if you have, 10 gigabytes. It's relatively small volumes and stuff. The numbers go up pretty quickly. With M365, so the storage is basically free. So what Microsoft does is Microsoft just assumes that they can provide storage cheaper than anybody else. They use that, I believe, kind of as a little bit of a lost leader to get the other functions there. And you can pump pretty much as much data as you want. There are some limits and stuff. But the discovery tools, it doesn't make any difference because it's managing it in place. And so it's a pretty compelling argument to be able to get rid of those tools. You may not get rid of relativity or something entirely, but you can get rid of 80 to 90% of the cost because of what you can do with the Microsoft platforms and stuff. So that's where it becomes an advantage. And then if you have third-party records management tools for storing things, the traditional copy and stuff like that, you don't have to do that. Those tools aren't as expensive, but still they can add up to be, pretty significant coin for an agency and stuff. So those are just some examples of things that you can get, for cost savings for things that you can retire. That doesn't include all the other things you can get from sunset systems that you take and store them as blobs and manage all those things, all of the other archive data that you can take and process. Like one of the things that we used to do with file shares for file share cleanups is we used to go through and do rot analysis. We'd take a look, find all the redundant, obsolete, and trivial information. Sort of the holy grail was thou shalt never transfer bad data. So because 40 to 60% of the information in an organization typically is rot, you didn't want to move that. Microsoft, again, the economics changed the game increasingly over these last, let's say, 2.5 years. What we do is we say, you know what, it may be rot, but it's cheaper to move it, let Microsoft deal with it, and then let the auto classification catch up and get rid of it than it is to clean it up with a dedicated tool up front and stuff like that. So we even have Google shops where we suck the information in, process it in Microsoft, and export it back out for Google because Microsoft has made it so attractive to be able to manage within the environment and stuff like that. So it's not just these things that are here. You can use the platform for a lot of cost savings in other areas as well. Now, look, we can't do everything all at once and stuff. And that's really going to be the heart of what I want you to come away with today is nobody has unlimited resources, contractors or, people in house and stuff like that to do these things. But what we generally find is that there are sort of two tracks that most organizations can be able to support and be able to, move down the pike and start accelerating the cost savings. So on the security front, IT typically has what I'd say is a moderate lift. Again, one of the things that I really give Microsoft credit for is they've not tried to be this sort of, academic, best in every feature and stuff like that. Instead, what Microsoft has said, look, we're going to have 80 to 90% of the best features at 10 to 20% of the cost and stuff like that. So I can still buy point solutions that might have a couple advantages functionally over Microsoft or something like that, but I can't find anything that's remotely close in terms of the cost effectiveness for what I do get. And one of the key aspects for that is Microsoft has made these tools easy to implement. So I'll give an example. Auto classification tools that we used to use. I might have to get 250,000 documents to do the training sets and stuff like that. With Microsoft, we regularly train on only 400 to 500 documents, and we get very, very good results. Microsoft has some other similar technologies around AI and stuff like that, that again, real compelling. Not trying to be some, academic, white paper or something like that gets published in the tech journals and stuff. It's really designed to be real world for what can someone implement fairly quickly. So in that regard, the Microsoft tools typically don't take as much effort to be able to implement as some of the other tools and stuff. Now, we still have some, legal and compliance. The AGC still has to weigh in on some things, but usually it's just, the IT teams and the security teams will come up, this is what we want to do, and then legal will just bless off on it and stuff like that. So it's not a whole lot. So the common priorities though, and you would typically do these in sequence. The first thing for every DLP and insider risk module should be come up with that data classification strategy. Figure out those labels and stuff, because whatever labels you come up with, they're going to outlive, your career at the agency. These are labels that are going to be here, 20 years from now and stuff like that. And we've seen this all across the board. It's really tough to put that genie back in the bottle and undo the things and fix the things and stuff. So you can take, a short period of time, and really, you're only talking about usually a couple months, even for slow-moving agencies, to make sure that you've got consensus, you've thought about where you're trying to go and get that straight. So, and by the way, it doesn't cost a whole lot to get that stuff in place and stuff like that. Once you have that, then you can roll out the baseline DLP rules. So, and within that, so you don't try and do everything. You start off with a set where you're testing the functionality. So you'll test, exact data matches. You'll test trainable classifiers. You'll test the out-of-the-box pieces. and stuff like that, which Microsoft does a really good job for and stuff. Normally, most organizations will turn those on and they'll just do auditing so they can see, okay, what did we find and stuff like that. We're not making it live on day one. So we're figuring out, oh, does that work? What kind of adjustments do we need to make? And then we start turning it on for groups as we move forward. So it's, the whole thing is we don't want to upset the users. Done properly, the users won't even be really aware that the DLP is there. It just works automatically. And then the insider risk modules, you do want to get to those as quickly as you can, but because the DLP is such a big deal, particularly because you can turn off the other tools like Semantic or something like that. The insider risk tools are things that most agencies don't quite have, or they have cobbled together with various components and stuff. These tools are very good. Communication compliance alone, out of the box, does more than, products that, I've worked with agencies to spend $10 million on and stuff like that. You can implement this stuff for less than $100,000. So it is really cost effective for what you get out of the box. And you can even then, once you have that infrastructure, you can use it for real complex, surveillance things. If you have like mandatory audits or certain capstone, people and stuff like that. So you can build surveillance things right off the platform and stuff like that. So that just gives you a sense of, you'd start off every organization would typically start off with a data classification strategy. And then, after a couple of months, then they go to DLP. You can implement the baseline DLP stuff, in 90 to 120 days in most cases and stuff. And then there'll be some continuous improvements from there, and you can start insider risk. But so that way you're spreading out the resources and stuff, but you're still maximizing your eventual cost savings from this. On the compliance side, ironically, IT doesn't have to do much. And the reason is because Microsoft's just built all this into Purview. So it's in the tenant. You have to have a couple discussions and get some security access things. But really, the way that Microsoft has made all the pieces work, IT doesn't have a lot that they have to do to implement most of the compliance modules. Now, legal does have some more stuff because now you're getting into policies and you're getting into nuance. When do I flag something, if I use communication compliance, when do I flag something for harassing behavior? What should be the workflow for approval and stuff like that? What are the restrictions that I need to make, for information going outside the agency? How do I handle, the different types of contractors that I work with and stuff like that. So they do have a heavier lift, but I wouldn't say that it's especially hard. Most of the time they already know the answers. They might not know how it applies. So they'd have to, work with the implementation teams to figure out what they need to implement. But for the most part, they'll already know the pieces there. So the good news is, what you find is that the legal teams have to do most of the work for compliance, and then the IT teams have to do most of the work for security. Not a surprise to anybody, but because they're not a real big lift, you can typically have those two work streams. So the common priorities on the legal side, the e-discovery modules are really, really good. Now, let me back up. There are two e-discovery modules from Microsoft. One is called e-discovery standard that comes with a G3 license. It's competent at best. So it's designed so you can meet the minimum requirements to do search and get the data out and stuff like that. E-discovery premium, which is what you get from the step-up licenses or the G5 licenses, that's the real thing. So you can do all the complex things. You can search on MIP labels. You can slice and dice. You can push a button and it exports to the relativities of the world and stuff like that. So that's the real e-discovery module and stuff like that. And because that has big cost savings and you can use it for FOIA and other things, that tends to be a fairly high priority because, again, very inexpensive. We bring this up for $25,000 for agencies. It's that simple. We walk through it. That includes all the training and everything else. It's that simple to implement for people that have some background in it and stuff like that, and it just works. From there, typically, again, communication compliance is the next one. So again, so this is going to be several months later, because the compliance team is going to be, first of all, doing e-discovery, getting that stuff up and running. Maybe they're doing the FOIA application there, and then it'd be communication compliance. And ironically, records management usually comes a little bit later. And it's not because it's not as important. It's usually because they have something in place that they can let continue to do the records management functionality for today. So they could wait a year or 18 months while they start getting the cost savings and the other benefits and stuff like that from the other things and stuff. So again, this is not hard and fast. The only thing I would say that's sort of, really critical is do that data classification if you're going to do anything for DLP or insider risk. But the rest of the stuff, it's, it depends on where the agency is for the maturity. and what your priorities are and what your risk profile is and stuff. Okay, so it comes back to, this whole idea that we want to prioritize and balance based on cost and risk. So again, there's no magic to this. These are just sort of best practices over what is, really, 24 to 30 months since the product got. So what I would say is, it's sort of kick-ass quality and stuff like that. So before that, Microsoft still had enough gaps and stuff that there were some things. But today, we're still learning and evolving on best practices. The new stuff that's available for the commercial customers, for the adaptive protections and stuff like that, we're still playing with that now. Even it's only been out a couple months, we're still enhancing what the best practices are around that. So it's going to take some time to figure out some of those things going forward. So, okay, so let's talk about a typical MIP deployment. Just again, giving you some set of baselines for what people typically do. On the data classification strategy, what you want to do is figure out what tags you're going to use for what types of content. The other thing that's critical to understand at this point is what do you want to do with encryption? Because down the road, you probably are going to encrypt certain information types, or at least under certain DLP scenarios. Again, encryption can be a real pain because particularly if you're dealing with third parties, you can have like encryption issues if you have to send to an external e-discovery tool or something like that. Within Microsoft, it handles all that. But if you're going to interact with outsiders, it becomes more complicated. So you really need to think that through. I would say that for federal agencies and for government contractors, that's one of the more critical issues. And there are some quirks, okay? There are some very specific issues about, how does the de-encryption work? Is it for the recipient or is it for the sender and stuff like that? So, how do organizations work? How do the DLPs work for revoking the access and stuff? So anyway, those are the kind of things that you'll do in that. But again, you're not talking about a big project here, are you? You're talking about literally a couple months of bringing stakeholders together, getting it right, socializing what you come up with, asking them to walk through how would this work in your current workflow and stuff like that. Again, not really complex. From there, you want to define the basic DLP rules, and this is what you're going to start with. You're going to have the M365 and Exchange rules. You'll also have Defender for Cloud. That's to be able to go in the third parties. And the reason why you want to do that early on is because the rules that you come up with should work both internally and externally. You want to apply the same sets of rules, get the same protections, whether it's stored in your tenant or whether you're just managing it because you own it as part of the contractual requirements and stuff like that. So you're going to start with fairly simple classifiers, usually only like 2 or 3 rules by type and stuff like that, just to test it out, get a handle on it. Again, you'll build from there, but you're not trying to boil the ocean. You're not trying to do some big thing. Now, there is one exception. If you have like a renewal date for Symantec or something like that, those cost savings are so considerable. Microsoft has a package that are tools that allow us to convert the Symantec rules directly into Microsoft rules for Defender for Endpoint and the DLP stuff. That's a little different because the dollars are just so significant. You might accelerate that and make a bigger program and stuff like that. But if you've got time, you don't have to start with that. And so it just depends on your renewal date for those other things. Okay, once you've got that straight, then you're going to go to a formal POC. So you start off just building the rules, running them for monitoring and audit purposes, see how they work and stuff like that. And now you're ready to turn them on. So this is where you'll have your sensitive information types that you're going to set up. You want to make sure that you've got all 5 things covered in any POC, because these are the things that you're going to get your lessons learned. The auto labeling, one of the most powerful things that you can get. Again, not available for GCC High today, but supposed to be available. Is it August, Megan? The auto classification in GCC High? No, it is live now. I'm sorry. That's, yeah. It is live now. I'm sorry. Yeah, of course. We've got customers that are using it.
Worry for a second.
Yeah. No, sorry. So there's something else that it's not coming out till August. But no, we've got customers that are using that and stuff. Of course, the manual labeling, you're always going to have some manual things. But the good news is in Microsoft, for the most part, it's an exception. The nice thing is, let's say I've got a document I try and send out. It says, hey, it looks like you're sending confidential information. You can set the rules up so that you prompt the user to either make a justification or say, hey, no, it got misclassified. Here's what the correct one is and stuff. One of the neat things about Microsoft is every time you touch a document, it does the analysis and stuff like that. So you're not consuming lots of money continuously doing things in the background. Microsoft does do some things in the background, but they do it when it's opportunistic and stuff like that. But the big thing is that they know that CPU utilization is going to be involved when you're touching the document. So you might as well do the classification and check those things there. You've also got things like the sharing links and stuff like that, how that's going to work. I would say related to that is, making sure you understand how the versions are going to work for downstream records management purposes or e-discovery. Like in the e-discovery, that's a big deal. When I pull it back, am I pulling back the current document or am I pulling back the version at the time that I'm looking for the matter or something like that? It could be both and stuff, but you have to know what it is and you can set that up and stuff like that. Watermarks and encryption, again, big deal. You want to make sure that you get those tested and some lessons learned so you can figure out the best practices for what works for your organization. And then you turn it on. You typically turn it on. You start with Exchange. That's the hot one for everybody. That's the thing that particularly the lawyers care about and stuff. And then you'll quickly move to OneDrive and SharePoint. Teams has become obviously really hot. There's been an explosion of stuff. If we thought it was bad with SharePoint, it's even worse in Teams for how things are structured and organized. The good news is the e-discovery tools and some of the other things you can do sort of, paper over the lack of organization that most organizations have with Teams, so you can get away with it and stuff. But the sooner that you can turn on, like, the insider risk management, the DLP policies for those things, the sooner you'll make sure that you don't have data leakage between them and stuff like that. So, but that's how most organizations would do it quickly because it's easy just to check the box and turn them on. And what you're doing is you're giving your teams time to see, okay, what are the alerts? What are the false positives that we get? We're trying to minimize the false positives so that we can let the system do as much of the work and not have to have human intervention. Defender for cloud apps, there is a little bit more here. This is where we need to make sure we've got the security. We can go out to the third-party things. Again, Microsoft does a nice job with the connectors. I think with it, Microsoft has, I don't know how many systems there are that it directly connects to, but it's a lot. I mean, it's over 100 systems. I think it's over 200 systems that the Defender for Cloud Apps talks to now and stuff like that. So, and more systems are providing support for it all the time and stuff like that. So, and again, you can use those DLP policies there, but you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't start off with this. You want to make sure you've got it running for your homogeneous stuff that you've got inside your organization. Oh, and by the way, back to this, one of the other things you can do on the cloud side is you can do auto classification against the content. So if you've got something sitting in Box or something like that, you can actually take your MIP labels and your retention labels and assign them to the document that's in Box and everything else and stuff like that. So it allows you to scan those and find information and do things with it and stuff like that. So the other common modules that people would do after that, insider risk management, so a whole suite of things there. Communication compliance is technically one of the insider risk management modules. We typically break it up because the benefits are so big for the organization and stuff like that. And last but not least, one of the real surprises is Microsoft's advanced audit is one of the most fidelity-rich audit systems you'll ever see. It has a ton of information. I'm not even exactly sure, in all candor, how Microsoft is able to capture so much information without, killing the database performance and stuff like that. You can capture a ton of information in there and you can use it for external things and other things. The default is 1 year. You have to check in your license. I think you have to pay extra if you want to keep it beyond a year and stuff like that. That's something to investigate because you can get a lot of stuff that's really important there. The other thing that you can do once you have that is you can do what we call lookbacks. Now, if I want to test a new policy or something like that, I can run against the repositories in advanced audit to say, what would be the impact if I had this policy? You can also use it for certain investigations to say, hey, what was it that we were missing? To Mark's point about stuff that was happening last August, it would be nice if I had something at the push of a button and say, oh, here's where we had an issue and stuff like that. Here's how we corrected quickly and stuff like that. So advanced audit is one of those things. It's literally a couple $10,000 to implement and stuff like that. It is really, Microsoft's done a good job making this real easy. Now, again, there's tuning that has to go into for what you do for the alerts and stuff like that. I'm not minimizing those, but in terms of the actual implementation and getting useful stuff out of it, it's pretty cheap to be able to get it up and running. And that's kind of it for this part and stuff like that. So, I just wanted to give you kind of a framework and a starting point. Like I've said already, this is not super complex. It's just sort of knowing, if there's one thing I'd say is don't overdo it, except for like the semantic. replacements or something like that. The rest of the thing, take a little bit of time, an extra 6 months or something like that, isn't going to kill you most of the time in the implementation. And you're going to save an enormous amount of money down the road for being able to go there. All right. So with that, I can open it up to questions if people online want to come off mute or people here have any questions.
I have a question with regard to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No.
With regard to, like, I know from my perspective, I demo this product to customers and we get really excited about it. And then when it's like, we've made the procurement and now we need to make the rubber hit the road. And it's like, oh, we're going to implement this with our IT shop. We got 6 guys and they're like really excited. And we have an enterprise of, 100,000 users. What, from a service perspective, can Epiq offer for folks that are approaching, leveraging MIP, DLP, with regard to assisting in that deployment?
Yeah, so for the common things around MIP, because it's so hot, and just, full confession, Microsoft funds Epiq a lot of times to come into agencies and to commercial customers to help accelerate the deployment. So the philosophy has been that we can accelerate the deployment and get those cost savings and the benefits so that it's stickier, so that when your renewal rate comes up, so you've already using the product and you've gotten money out of it and stuff like that. So within that, we kind of have 10 modules that are most common and stuff like that. It's a lot less expensive than you might think. For example, we bring up the DLP POCs for around 50K. Advanced audit is $14,000 to bring up in a live scenario. The e-discovery modules, the e-discovery is a little more complex because in the customer environment, there are legal situations that you'll never see until you see them. So we have to break that out where we use the Epiq environment to teach them on sort of the things that they may see later that they couldn't see in their environment. And then we set them up and teach them how to do the legal holds and everything in their environment. The whole thing to go live there is $25,000. So, and there are other vendors that do similar things and stuff. So I'm not trying to be a shill for anything here, but I think just we have people that have been embedded with Microsoft on the product team for the things in this stack. So we kind of know where the bodies are buried and we can tell you the workarounds. There's a quirk for this. This is what you do. Here's the difference between this and some third-party products. So understand what the differences are. But yeah, you'd be surprised. I mean, the biggest DLP programs in the world, we still bring up for 200K. So we publish the numbers with Microsoft. So, it's not any secret on this stuff, but it's not nearly as expensive as what you might think because Microsoft is focused on making it inexpensive to deploy.
So with the respect of, like, I know where customers that attempt to enable this technology on their own, I kind of know what roadblocks, and I think Mike alluded to it earlier, that we tend to let perfect be the enemy of good and overlook just having a minimum viable product. And then the other thing I would say is that we don't have our knowledge managers engaged. This tends to be an isolated or siloed IT shop type deployment, and we don't have the people who actually know the data. In fact, when I was presenting at Gartner last week, one of the common themes that people would come up to me and say, so I need to get like my people from like HR and finance, like they need to be involved in like training these sensitive information types and trainable classifiers. Like, yeah, of course, they like know the data. So from your perspective, what challenges do you see? Like what, customers kind of like don't want to like necessarily get out of their own way in order to implement this. What challenges do you see from your side that preclude people from having a successful deployment?
Yeah, so I think there are 3 key things that jump out. First is organizations assume that they have to go big early and stuff like that. And that's just not the case. So you can get a lot of benefit from even fairly simple things and stuff. So getting some understanding of that is important. And the reason why that's so important is because the second issue is people get overwhelmed by the initial configurations for false positives. And this is what screws up a lot of projects. They turn it on without understanding the business implications of what the system's going to do or how do you tune things. And they say, oh, I got so many, alerts and stuff, it becomes ineffective. It could be, it's just like the search results. you can give me 100,000, you might as well give me 1,000,000 because I can't process 100,000. I certainly can't process 1,000,000 hits and stuff like that. So we actually have to typically spend a lot of time with organizations to really find out. We focus on more how do we eliminate the false positives than we even worry about the accuracy, because they're downstream things that can help with accuracy. But if you're not familiar with, sort of the nuances, we've seen a lot of organizations get, caught and wrapped around the axle and stuff like that. It's like, oh, the sky is falling, the tool doesn't work, it doesn't do this. And it's like, no, it does. You just have to know what to do with it and stuff like that. So, and then the third thing is really just figuring out those stakeholders. There is a belief that you typically have to have a heavy lift from lots of people. And look, everybody's busy today, because we don't have big budgets, and, federal agencies are being asked to do more with less. And, it used to be at least I could maybe supplement with contractors. Now I have trouble even doing that and stuff like that. So the workloads can be somewhat dramatic and stuff. And so there's a belief that I don't have people that can participate in these sessions and stuff like that. So the way to get around that is have a very small group, or a vendor or something like that, come to the table with sort of a draft or something like that. Say, here's a starting point. This is not going to be what we end up with, but let's start with here. Let's get a couple hours, not days, but hours from key stakeholders. Refine that. That's when you're going to go and you're going to implement the rules, and you start to see the results, and then you can go back and talk to them. Before you even turn on a single live rule in the POC, you've already gotten feedback and people to socialize it. And the other thing is, just as they go through it, they realize, oh, well, I forgot to tell you this and stuff like that. Here's something else we can do and stuff like that. And then, sort of related to that is you also set the change management mantra early, which is, look, it's not going to be perfect on day one. So we're going to start with a baseline. You're going to get to have input, the things you don't like, the things that are a problem for you, we're going to fix. That's part of the roadmap and the process. And so people relax, and it's like, okay, I get it. I'm not stuck in whatever, thing I don't like forever. So the team's going to have something there, but really it's not as heavy a lift. It's broad, but it's a small amount of time. And if you can articulate that to people and set that up, like when we do large DLP deployments, it's the teams end up with about, an hour and a half to 2 hours per week, for the first 8 weeks or something like that. It's not, some big megalithic project or something like that.
So what would you say is the average amount of time you spend with a customer doing an initial deployment of getting, like a minimum viable product, like a dozen labels up and running with DLP policies associated? Like, what's the average length of time you spend with a customer?
Yeah, so for commercial customers, it's 90 to 120 days or something like that. Agencies is a little bit tougher because there are other competing things, and sometimes you got to have people bless things off and stuff like that. But still, you shouldn't take more than 6 months for any of these things. And if you have some nimbleness in your organization, you should be able to mimic the same things that the commercial organizations do. So, typically, I'd say, 120 to 180 days is kind of your realistic target for what you can get to. And that's production rules. It may not be every production rule you're going to have, but it's a pretty, healthy set of, production rules and stuff like that are really adding value.
Is that timeline for just what I would call the first phase? Because what I'm hearing is pilot to scale. Pilot convinces the customer, this will actually work. I am now willing to give you a little bit more to get to scale. But the limitations that you describe tell me in organizations like that are in my orbit that scaling quickly you got to scale slow.
Great question, Mark. So there are a couple of philosophies for that. What I would say for the size of the organizations you work with and, knowing some of the commands and stuff like that, what I would say is that your best bet is probably to focus on a limited number of policies at scale, as opposed to a large number of fidelity policies, that you start trying to expand. And the reason is because you want to get people used to it for fairly simple things. So like, hey, here's a blocker, forces them to, make a justification that goes into the audit log and stuff like that. So introduce the concepts, but not anything that's probably going to get in the way of anything and stuff like that. So it can almost be in parallel. If a lot of organizations do run in parallel to their existing DLP systems for some period of time and stuff like that. So there's not a one size fits all, but what you can do with Microsoft is you can turn on policies very, very quickly across the tenants and stuff like that easily. And if you make it so that users don't even know that it's there early on, and again, that's why we always start with the monitoring. So we start with the monitoring and figure it out. And then they go, okay, if it had been live, here would have been the alerts and stuff like that. And we can socialize that with users and refine that. So you definitely want to do that before it goes live. And, you know, that may be a month or two or something like that. So.
Question on the chat.
So in the chat, so I can't see,
Question in the room too.
I can't see on here. Megan, can you read it out?
So is there discussion on how and when to migrate, sorry, I bumped my own, is there discussion on how and when to migrate the capstone email journaling from DISA to the Netcom A365 litigation hold downgrade, a SME or downrange, guys?
Yep.
My glasses on.
Sounds good.
3:30.
That's a lot.
A SME or POC for that information. There's a lot to unpack with that. That question is very specific to, so I'll touch on this a little bit. The answer is there's more organization than one that is, no, I made up the word downgrade. There's more than one organization currently that is having to offload their email journaling from DISA. It's not just to the Netcom tenant, but other organizations. And I wish I had a better answer, but so we're working with a couple of organizations within Joint to figure out that exact process.
So is it an email archive like a Enterprise Vault or something like that?
DISA has like a whole bunch of data, email journals that are stored in a third-party tenant, Commvault, that's correct.
Okay, so fine.
Down in
Okay.
Hampton Roads.
So
It's
this
a
is,
mess.
so here's the catch. So there are two key aspects when it comes to journal email migrations. The first thing is in the journal, they try and basically compress them where they take one email and they make one. So we have to pull it out and rehydrate it. So you have to do an analysis, and we have tools to go through and figure out what the rehydration ratio is. And it changes over time. What we found is that organizations, you know, depending on sort of the culture and what's going on, they may copy God and everybody. So an average email may end up with 14 copies or something like that. So other groups and stuff, they may have been, you know, small and lean or something, may only be 5 or 6 or something like that. That rehydration takes time. So, and there's no two ways about it. So the secret for all of those platforms is they want to lock you in because that's the recurring revenue and they make it really, really tough to get it out. No disrespect to the business model. Everyone understands why they do it and stuff like that. But getting out of those things can be a big cost savings, and the longer you wait, it's tough. The second problem, though, is there are catches. Microsoft has throttling limits. They want to make it so that hackers basically can't come in, but also so vendors, you know, can't sort of damage the platform by consuming all of the bandwidth and stuff like that and the CPU utilization. So there are limitations about how fast you can put the data back into Microsoft. So with Epiq, we have some ways to trick it. Microsoft can cover their ears and stuff like that, but even there's some limitations. So they really come down to 3 different ways that most organizations typically do. And there's some others, but I'm going to cover the most common. Because the Microsoft storage is effectively free, lots of organizations want to take the email, they'll rehydrate it, and they'll put it back in the user mailboxes. So the user will have them, then retention can run normally, legal holds run normally and stuff like that. That is the slowest way, but it has the most fidelity. It's easy, it's super cheap, something we couldn't do before with other platforms because we had to pay the money for the storage and stuff like that. We can do something faster, which, and again, Microsoft can cover their ears. We can use shared mailboxes for e-discovery purposes. So now, instead of putting the email in an individual mailbox, we put them in shared mailboxes that typically just the e-discovery FOIA teams can process. So now we're cramming a bunch into a handful of mailboxes. We can do that much, much faster. I mean, sometimes 3 times faster than individual mailboxes. So, I mean, it's a big deal because, look, some of these big migrations can literally have to run for a couple years. And that's why it's important to get a handle on it because, you know, you're stuck with the vendors, and like we mentioned in a hallway conversation, Source One, for example, it's past end of life and stuff like that. So, I mean, you can't even get security updates or anything like that for it. So, you know, e-discovery tools may not be able to get access to it and stuff like that. So that's helpful. The third common option is you can take all of that Commvault information and you dump it into these giant Azure blobs. We usually segment a little bit. And then the e-discovery tools can run against those and find them. So the users can't get access to the information, but I can still get it out. And the Azure storage is really cheap. I'm not having to go through it very often and stuff like that. And I can get that stuff out, depending on the size of the migration, maybe I can get that stuff out, live in a couple months or something like that, as opposed to the individual mailbox rehydration. But the short answer is yes, you can do it. There are very compelling financial reasons to do so, but there are a bunch of nuances that go into that and stuff.
So with that question in particular, then I'll just touch on so that Lawrence knows, but most customers that I have dealt with, we are leaning toward the third option that you presented. The issue that we're up against is right now the Purview data governance side is in a gated preview. So once those assets have been migrated into an Azure blob storage, we just need the ability to, because it's not being brought over intelligently, right? It's in a perfect world, you wouldn't migrate the data that should have already been deleted.
Right.
You would cull it first and then, only bring over what's relevant, but they don't have the ability to do that in a lot of these customer cases. So I think the general guidance right now is just to pause.
Well, there are other things where you can pull them over and put them in an Azure blob. You don't need anything special. You don't need the data governance pieces, just a standard blob. And they're third-party things that you can use as your temporary tools and stuff like that. You can even selectively migrate back to the mailboxes and stuff. One of the common things, not common, but one of the things that some organizations do is they say, look, I got to get off this email archive quickly. And I got to get rid of Enterprise Vault or something like that. Let me go ahead and dump it to Azure. And then that'll buy me a year, and then I'll get it back to the individual mailboxes, or I'll do the cleanup or something like that. And then I'll even turn off that and stuff like that. But, you can be talking easily millions of dollars per year that you save on this stuff. So even if you do something that's a little temporary and stuff like that, it is a relatively short period of time. Yes.
I've got a great presentation, by the way. I have a question about encryption and data mapping and the ability to do a data map look at other locations, let's say Box, to identify encrypted material. Is that possible? How does that work?
So no, particularly with Box has their own, Box is kind of weird. Box has their own DLP that they want you to use, but they support Microsoft's MIP tagging and stuff like that. So what you have to do in that situation is you have to run a script in Box to identify all of the stuff they've classified that should be encrypted. And then what you do is you set the Microsoft tag to indicate. So it's a workaround because of how Box is doing that. But there is not a way just to go look at it and figure out, is it, gibberish, i.e. encrypted, or is it, some standard document? You don't know that till you copy the document over. So, and by the way, there are restrictions with Box for the number of documents you can analyze per day and stuff like that. So I think the current limitation is generally 10,000 a day, which for a back file could be tough. For ongoing, it's not a big deal. But if you've got a big back file to apply that, we've got a couple customers where we're struggling with some, frankly, bizarre workarounds to be able to, get those so that it doesn't take 4 years to classify a repository or something like that. So, but the short answer is no, there's no good way to analyze and detect for that. I can detect a zip file, but I can't detect, necessarily encryption within that easily.
So I think the other session is running long, so we can pause and wait for them to come back and do a formal Q&A, or we can just continue Q&A here.
We're actually done on.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people still in that call, so I think they're.
Oh, well, you can post in there.
The other class actually is already ended.
Are they doing Q&A over there?
They're downstairs.
They're completely finished.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They're just
All right,
waiting for you
thank
to
you.
finish, I guess.
I guess. So there's still 10 participants in that call, so I'm not sure what they're doing.
Well, they're just sitting in there. I actually clicked over to this one just to see where you guys were at and see if they were finishing up in here or what. But I actually just hung up the line with them, so I can't click back over right now unless I go back to that link that you gave me and just let them know that you guys are getting ready to do question and answers down here. or Q&A?
They can do it.
I feel like, so it's not quite from the frying pan into the fire. It's kind of from the fire into the frying pan. So it is good.
You've been the face of it for such a
For those
long
online,
time.
we're going to wrap up today's session a little bit early. We've had quite a bit of attrition in the room, but that's to be expected because it's beer 30 somewhere. And I appreciate everybody dialing in and everybody's participation today. Post event, look for me to provide slides once I collect the slide decks from everybody. Of course, I'm a resource going forward. You can find me on LinkedIn and at Megan Maley at Microsoft. And I will also, once I clear the videos that we recorded today, I'll make those sessions available to participants and I'll let you know where you can find those. Most likely YouTube, but I'll follow up and make sure that everybody can find them. And once again, thank you everyone for your participation and have a great day.
We resisted initially because we put an application on there.
Yeah.
So many problems.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That
Thanks, everybody.
go down a fixed path and then we decided to go, the SES was sort of